Hello, hello.
Hello.
Very nice venue and good to be here. My name is Mart. Together with me on the stage is Joonathan. I'm product manager. Joonathan is CTO and head of product at Klaus. At Klaus, we are building software for companies who want to improve their customer support quality. But today, we are here to talk about how you can stop running around and start releasing products or features faster. We are going to talk about product management framework called ShapeUps. What is ShapeUps? If you feel that you have lost that ability to ship new features or products, because when you're planning your sprints, you always have to consider all the bugs, all the fires that you need to put out, different customer problems, and so on, and are struggling to add your own feature work into the sprints, that is this very narrow pipe, then ShapeUps might be something for you. Even before we start working, we usually build up our appetite. What does it mean? It means that we ask ourselves, how much time are we willing to fix that problem? How much are we willing to spend time building that feature? And that appetite corresponds to the fixed time and limited scope. That means that this also corresponds to the length of the build cycle. And the build cycle is usually no longer than 6 weeks. Of course, it can be less, 4 weeks or 3 weeks, but usually it's no longer than 6 weeks. Why 6 weeks? 6 weeks is long enough time to build something meaningful from 0 to 1, but still short enough that you have that sense of looming deadline from the beginning. When we are shaping the work, ShapeUp is divided into 2 parts, shaping the work and building. During the shaping, a team, usually consisting of product manager, UX designer, and tech lead, shape up the work that is then given to the team to build. The team works closely together to understand all the implications, solve all the problems that might arise during the building, and they try to figure out what needs to be built. During the shaping, we do not try to estimate how long would it take to build something. We don't ask from the team, what is the effort to build that feature, for example. Instead, we turn that question around and ask instead, what can we build given that time limit that we have, for example, 6 weeks. And that really puts us into a different perspective, because now we have to be really careful how we scope the work and have to consider what really matters, because the goal is to ship something given that fixed time. Shaping is also not planning, it's setting these rough boundaries, rough scope, and understanding what might go wrong during the building. When the work is shaped, the shaped work is given to the team to build, and then it's the team's responsibility to understand and figure out what needs to be built. They plan their own time and they create their own tasks, so there is no creation of Jira tasks or issues for them. When we are shaping, then it's important to consider the right level of detail needed for that specific product or project. The right level can be, for simple products, the right level can be as simple as we need a dashboard that gives a good overview and maybe some additional bullet points. In some other cases, we need these high-fidelity Figma designs so that the front-end team can start working in the beginning of build cycle. If the work is undershaped, if it's too laconic, then the team will waste valuable time during the build cycle figuring out what they need to do. And on the other spectrum, if the shaped work is too detailed, these beautiful, highly detailed Figma files that everybody loves, then there might be some complexities that the building team doesn't see when they start the work. There might be some components that your libraries are not supporting or some performance issues. And this also takes away the ability from the team to actually think how they would solve the problem by themselves. Right level of detail is somewhere in between that helps the team to understand all the different interactions, major flows, and so on. When we want the shaping to be really successful, then this has to be agreement on all levels of the organization, starting from management. This means that when the team starts building or shaping, this team is committed doing that work, and we do not distract them with bugs or customer issues and other things. And we also need to have a team that has competences across the whole stack of company technology, so back-end, front-end, UI designer, whatnot, because we need to be able to ship the whole product by ourselves, no dependencies. Sometimes we use the metaphor of hill of work to understand where the project is going. During the shaping, we want to get the top of this hill, meaning that we want to figure out what we need to do. If there are some legal issues, solve them, usability issues, technical issues. And then later we can use the same metaphor or hill of work to understand how the build cycle is doing. For example, on the third or fourth week of 6-week build cycle, if the team says that most of the work is still in that figuring out what to do phase, then we can be pretty sure that this building cycle will fail, and we will be not able to ship it on time. Then we have a decision to make. Do we help the team to figure out what to do? Probably too late. We can cut the scope, maybe. Usually what we do is we extend the build time a little bit, a few weeks, because the goal is to get things done. Also, sometimes when we see that there's some complexities that we didn't anticipate when shaping, it's also very rarely okay to cancel the project, because now our appetite doesn't match the reality anymore. The investment is too big, so we just cut the losses. I think by now it's quite clear that it's somewhat different from Scrum or Kanban. For me, the aha moment, or the biggest difference, is that ShapeUps doesn't have product backlog, meaning that we don't also have this product owner role that has to manage the product backlog. And that also means that we are not forecasting work. And we don't also have the other Scrum meetings and things that are done. So it's a little bit different. Why I, as a product manager, like shaping? It's called framework, but it behaves more like a set of guidelines. And if something happens during the shaping cycle or build cycle, it's easy to make decisions that benefit shipping the product. So we can always extend the cycle if needed, instead of planning a new cycle and then trying to fix stuff that wasn't released on time. Because the team creates their own tasks, there is no product backlog that a product manager needs to manage. And that means that there's a lot less work that I have to manage on daily basis. The team can mostly fix or solve most of the issues on their own. And that gives me more capacity to work on the future, on the product roadmap, on the vision and other interesting stuff. And of course, if the shaping cycles are going nicely, then you get this nice cadence of 6 weeks launching new stuff over and over again. But that's all from me. Now Joonathan will give a perspective from the engineering side.
Yes, hello from my side as well. And I'll be talking a little bit about how engineering comes into this play, how engineering sees this, and then we move on how we actually do things differently from Basecamp, who actually founded this framework and has been running with this now for years. At Klaus, we've been using ShapeUp framework for about maybe a little bit more than 2 years. So we're still quite early in this, in a sense. Some pluses and minuses from the engineering perspective. ShapeUp cycle and way of working suits better to mature engineering teams, where the engineers are product engineers, by the best meaning of that they actually understand and want to work on the product and solve end users' problems. We currently are not hiring full stack engineers, so we have back-end engineers, front-end engineers, specialists of their domains. And with them, the fact that we don't prepare them very well-defined tasks and there's no very thorough specifications works well. We can assume that this wouldn't work necessarily so well with a team of juniors that need a lot of hand-holding and so on. But we have solved this by not having fixed teams, but rather rotating people into the teams where the more senior people and people who have worked on this specific product area already before can then help them get on board. As Mart mentions, these teams working these 6-week cycles are very autonomous. So they have all the ownership over making decisions how to actually build this. Yes, there are some like organizational guidelines, like maybe it doesn't make sense to bring in a new programming language every time you want to get going with something, but if the reasons are sound, then of course that's an opportunity as well. And thus the team is motivated on actually building on top of what they have learned and keep going with that. And if they get tired of working on some specific product area, then we have a chance of rotating people in. And currently we operate with 2 different parallel product development lanes, where then in these 6-week cycles product gets developed. And also Mart didn't really tackle what happens to all the fires that typically need to be put out, and what happens to the bugs and so on. So in addition, and you might have seen that in the previous slides as well, in between of these 6-week cycles, we have 2-week cooldown periods. What the framework tells you is that at the time where there's no planned work. Reality might not be as shiny. There still might be some things that need to happen in between as well. But the best case is that developers then have a chance to work on dealing with all these technical debt issues, non-burning bugs and everything like that, and pick these up from based on their own like product understanding almost. So that's the perspective from engineering side. What do we do differently?
Maybe one thing is that in the shape-up framework they describe this thing called petting, which means basically that there is supposed to be a different team that shapes up different projects, and then there is this betting round where the company or leadership or whoever decides what to build. So we don't have time or resources to shape up so many different projects to pick from. So we usually already know what we are going to build or what we want to build, and get on shaping up.
Yeah, so rather having a different team working on preparing pitches, something that like startups do and whatnot, we kind of have this more typical, slightly political process of planning roadmap a little bit ahead. We don't look at very long periods. We know what the next 2 shape-up cycles for a specific lane might be. Maybe we have a lot of different components that we want to push onto those lanes, but we don't do pitching and betting to handle these into the lanes, but rather we look at what it actually means for the company and what we actually need to build to get towards our vision. And we look at that separately from the shape-up framework.
And then comes the maybe second difference is that usually it's supposed to be that the team who shapes up the work hands it over to the team who is going to build it. So there is this distinct handing over, and the team who shaped the work doesn't necessarily need to be involved in the building. But in our case, usually the same team, the UX designer, product manager, is also heavily involved also during the building cycle.
Yeah, and then typically our teams are larger than maybe what the shape-up framework as such defines. So typically, like if you read the Basecamp's shape-up framework book, it talks about teams of like maybe a single full-stack developer, maybe a designer, maybe someone else included in that. But at Klaus, our typical shape-up team is 2 front-end developers, 2 back-end developers. A QA joins in, there's product manager involved, there's a product designer and a UX designer involved as well. And some of these are new compared to the framework that Basecamp has defined initially. I think one important distinction there is that, and that's kind of comes to the engineering perspective as well, is that including QA early on definitely pays off, because fixing the time frame to the 6 weeks, like the 2-week cooldown period shouldn't be a safety net where all this QAing and everything like that happens. Like we want to have a product that's actually ready for end users by the end of the 6th week. So everything should happen within the 6-week period, and everything that overflows into the cooldown period should rather be seen as a failure.
Maybe there are already some questions from the audience. There is one question. Where is it?
Hi, my name is Dennis. We have been using Basecamp's framework, original one, and so I have a question. Compared to Scrum and Kanban, what's the best outcome of this switch for your company? I mean, in terms of time savings or different results, if you measured it?
I think from product perspective, it's the fact that you actually are able to ship things within these 6-week cycles. But if you're doing Kanban or Scrum, then you have this big prioritized list of product backlog, and you're doing tasks one by one, and you're not necessarily always releasing every 2-week cycle anything, and you might not even release anything for, I don't know, months. So
yeah, it's reducing potential waste from the processes, and giving more autonomy and control to the teams without needing to have a specific role like, I don't know, Scrum Masters or someone actually whipping the team so things would happen. Yes, we have product manager in the cycle as well, and of course there's check-ins happening and everything like that, but if you have a mature team having autonomy to figure out how to solve the problem and drive to actually solve that problem because they can see their output bringing joy to someone when using the product, then there's a lot less waste and a lot less rituals that you have to go through. Yes, it might be a struggle, like if someone joins from a non-product organization where they have worked on very specific tasks, like maybe even in a 1-week sprints, and then they know that every 1 week there's a checkpoint and someone will verify whether they are happy with their work or not. And now they are in a 6 weeks development cycle where there's a lot of communication and collaboration happening without like a supporting rituals and so on, then they might feel lost initially. But when they get going, and typically they do get going, they actually understand the value in this framework as well.
Yeah, I see. Thank you. We had similar results in our company. We have adopted it for one team. It's an internal team that gets a lot of requests from users. And so for that team, the main outcomes were first, the team, especially developers, they liked it because they started to work more calmly, or I mean without stress. Especially they liked this cooldown thing. And for the company as a whole, I think the main outcome is that the team started to build more value, and more people started to understand what they are working on. By the way, we are using this public betting process, and so everybody in the company can submit pitches to internal team to prioritize.
Yeah, we kind of handle that like pitching and betting projects slightly differently. As we said, we don't necessarily use that, but we still use the input from all the participants and the whole company and from our customers and so on. So whether it's a process built for voice of the customer, where all different departments then bring their input for the previous quarter or something like that, and then our product managers consider that and bring something in. Like we said, we don't keep a product backlog, but we still keep a list of ideas, and we do have a roadmap and the process around the roadmap and planning that. And so today we can say that like by August we probably have built these things, but that also gives us the flexibility. If business needs change or something else comes along, we actually have the flexibility to change those plans as well. Yes, it's maybe a little bit like a business or sales might not necessarily be super happy if they don't know what to sell already in December or something like that, but they learn to live with that as well. And there's still enough visibility and enough excitement, and first and foremost, enough of that predictable cadence of shipping things that then actually makes them happy as well. Like they know that it's not something that arrives next year in the second quarter, but they know that there's already something happening in next 8 weeks, for example.
More questions? Very nice. It's uncommon from the Estonian conference.
Front row.
Hello, my name is Natalia. I wanted to ask what is the size of the building team, engineering team?
35, I think, is our product and engineering organization right now. Klaus altogether is less than 70 people.
Up to 5 engineers in one building team. Do I understand correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So in this cycle team, yes, that's like the typical setup of cycle team is 2 front-end developers, 2 back-end developers, UX, UI, all of that jazz.
And the question is, like this 6 weeks, which is given to this cycle team to build the expectations or the requirements, how it is organized? Could you maybe dive in a little bit into that? Do you have weekly checkpoints, daily checkpoints, I don't know, demos?
Yes.
Yeah, we have, well, it depends. The team can decide how they want to do that. But what we now usually do is we have weekly status updates, like face-to-face or in the Zoom. And we also have this async status updates in Slack, where everybody can use like color screen, yellow, red, and then if something is in yellow or red zone, then we can tackle these issues and figure out what we need to do to make them happy again.
Regarding demos, we actually do have bi-weekly demos for the whole company. So all the different shape-up cycle teams can actually demo what they have been working on, and if there's engineers actually working outside from shape-up cycle. So we have that overflow capacity as well. Maybe they work on putting out fires, like more urgent bugs, implementation work for new customers, then they have a chance to demo as well. So it's not like a demo hour for specific team, but it's like the whole product and engineering organization.
And the last question, well, when you started using this framework, I mean, the first cycles probably, I don't know, were they successful or not? Probably not that successful. How did you decided to proceed with that? Because is this just a trust to your engineering team, or what was the driver or motivation there? Or it was just successful from the really beginning? Faith, trust
absolutely.
into you.
And I think actually maybe the very first cycles actually were successful, but we definitely have seen failures as well. We have said that like this shape-up cycle is failed. Let's like honestly admit that this failed. Like the outcome is not what we expected. Like it doesn't work, whatnot. And then it's a decision point what you want to do. Like, do you see that like this functionality is still important? We still want to do that. And that might mean that now you're back to maybe doing that 2-week shaping to actually understand why you failed and what you should be doing differently. Looking at the scope and everything like that, and then starting new cycle. This has happened. And another thing important there is that like not everything, especially new things, can be built in 6-week cycles. It might mean that building something new, like in Klaus' example, CSAT survey functionality actually takes multiple shape-up cycles. They may be consecutive, they don't necessarily have to be consecutive. In our case, the first CSAT cycle didn't actually deliver end-user value, other than us as a company being able to use something that didn't yet have any interfaces or anything like that as our own, like the CSAT survey engine. Like if we needed to understand what our CSAT score is, someone needed to do a query in a database somewhere and look what the number is. but still we had some type of a delivery happening, so we could switch it on for ourselves and start testing it. And I think that's the main point. Like, you should still try to deliver something, even if you understand that you're aiming to build something much, much bigger, but you're just trying to get there iteratively. You have this 6 weeks, you reduce the scope, however you need to reduce it to fit into that 6 weeks. And Mart mentioned that the framework, yes, allows you to work with 3 or 4 weeks or 8 weeks or whatnot. For us, it's 6 weeks. We really only have added weeks when it's, I don't know, it's Christmas and there's really no one in there, and saying that it still needs to fit into the 6 weeks wouldn't really be honest for everyone. Like, it would have been 4 or 5 week cycle without those added weeks. So that's when we have been kind of changing the cycle length.
Sorry, really last question. Still, this framework, like, is this really only faith that this way will be better?
No, like initially it was faith, like
Okay.
just pushing through. Initially we were really driven by the fact, like, where can we reduce the waste in the processes? Like, if there was UX designer has done something like 3 months before and then it ends up in like developers' hands and so on, that's waste, because life has changed. Like, whatever mocks were made 3 months ago wouldn't apply when someone starts working on it. UX designer needs to be brought back and the work starts again. So getting rid of that was initial why we started looking into different ways of working. And we had faith in this. We saw that this might work. The first cycles were really successful, so we kept going, and now we see that we are quite effective. Of course, we have done a lot of changes to the framework as such, and the framework itself, if looking into what the Basecamp guys are doing themselves now behind the scenes, it doesn't look necessarily what's written in the book anymore as well. So we have our own version. Now Mart is part of the Ryan guys, like, I don't know what it's called. Course about shaping, and it seems that it's more what we do, what they do now as well. So great minds think alike, I guess. There was an additional question here somewhere in the front row. Okay. There's.
Please tell a bit, like, what is the input that the product manager gives to the engineering team? In other words, what does the shaped up thing look like before it's built? And another thing, like, how does the back and forth communication between a PM and the engineering team happen usually during the cycle?
Very good question, thank you. The framework doesn't specify what the shaped up work should look like. It really depends on what you're building, how complex is it, and how many like moving pieces are there. As I said in the beginning, if you're building something really simple, you want to just add a button or some new filter to your interface, then the shaped up work can be as simple as a text document describing what you do and what should happen there. It can be like hand-drawn mocks that describe the interaction between components and kind of explains what should happen when customer clicks something. Or in some cases, it can be really high fidelity designs. Of course, it's sort of like a startup one-pager. There's also like information about why we are doing that, some business context, who are the customers who will be using that, how do we measure success, what are the metrics, and so on. And usually during the shaping, we already involve either someone from the engineering team, like a lead engineer or senior engineer, or sometimes even the whole team to the process, so they can give feedback, so they understand what we are going to build. They can point out that this might be not possible, there might be some better ways to do that. And then during that 2-week cycle, we come to the final conclusion that this is what we are going to build, and basically everyone agrees and says that, okay, this is also doable in the 6-week cycle.
Yeah, and I think it's like important why to talk about the different like levels of fidelity there in the input is that we still want to have, like, it shouldn't be like a specification what to do, like these are the 100 lines of code that you need to write. We want to have this developer and engineering team to actually have that ownership to figure out how to actually achieve the goal. So the goal needs to be clear from that specific like a fidelity document that you show them, not necessarily the solution itself.
The appetite or the build cycle doesn't necessarily need to be 6 weeks. It can be also 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then it's just shorter.
In our case, that's why the cooldown period is good. Like if it's a really small thing, it probably fits nicely into those 2-week cooldowns. We have done few of those cycles when we indeed pile something bigger together. But it's good if there's still like, it might be something smaller, but there's a common theme around them. If it's like very, very different things, I think the cooldown periods are much better for that, or leaving that for someone who's not necessarily going into the next cycle, so the overflow capacity, so to speak.
Ideally, we always have engineers who are not committed to the building cycle. They're sort of like this cooldown, not necessarily in the cooldown period, but they're not actively building anything shaped, so they can take these tasks and solve them.
Yeah, I think the framework itself and the book is actually quite adamant about that. You should protect the team that is in the cycle. We are trying to achieve that. We're trying to get there. It needs some organizational changes, and of course, like if currently one of our biggest customers comes to us and says that they need something to happen, and then we have all the developers for some reason in a cycle, like yes, it's very likely that we need to pull someone out. So we can't indefinitely protect that from happening, and that's one reason why we today have a little bit larger teams as well. So typically, like if there's a more senior backend engineers and maybe like a mid-level backend engineer working on something, and the senior guy needs to do something for 2 days, like the whole cycle wouldn't necessarily fail. Like it still can continue running. Ideally, of course, we want to get into the place where we can actually like have those people focus on building product and the future value, and someone else taking care of putting out the fires.
What were the main reasons for Circle's failures?
$1,000,000 question. I guess one of the main reasons was that we were inexperienced, in a sense that we couldn't understand what could be built in 6 weeks, and the greed of product managers and UX designers was maybe too big. We tried to add too many things into that shape-up cycle, and maybe the engineering team also wasn't paying attention and pushing back that, hey, this might be too much. Or there was some, at least in one case, during the shaping, completely new complexities came up, and it was really difficult to solve, so the whole shaping cycle basically failed because we were unable to ship anything. But it's mostly has to do with scoping. You have to be really, really ruthless and really focus on what you want to build. You just can't pile everything into it and call them like stretch goals, and then the team will feel a little bit bad if they can't do everything.
Yeah, indeed, like the specific complexities that you might have missed somehow, and then that's like framework talks quite a bit about them as well, like figuring out, especially in the shaping process as such. But still, it's easy to like miss something, and our product is already quite a complex one. So that added to the fact that someone somewhere missed something caused us to fail, but it gave us a chance to learn from that specific failure. That I think was the last time we actually failed that miserably as we did with the cycle.
For the bigger things that don't fit in the 6-week cycle, so like how do you not get stuck in doing something to just deliver in 6 weeks instead of like this is what the customer needs. And if you have a project that, let's say, you want to refactor your whole main product, then how do you plan that? Do you already divide it up into like the 6-week cycles within the first, like, I don't know, planning or shaping session, or?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sometimes we already, when we start something big, something new, we already put placeholders into roadmap that this will have 0.2 shape up also coming after that. But I would say mostly, at least for us, it's still possible to build something meaningful already in the first 6-week cycle.
The 6-week cycle also gives you a nice feedback loop opportunity. So yes, you might already have ideas what you want to do, and then in some cases, maybe the first iteration doesn't actually, like the first shape-up cycle is still like a preparation for something bigger, and there's like infrastructure works that need to happen and everything like that. You have bundled into the first one. Then with the second cycle, you actually release something. Maybe it's a little bit better than MVP or something like that, but you already can get some type of feedback and some sort of a pull from your customers where to continue taking that product. And then you have a chance to look at like what you have now planned on your roadmap for the next few cycles. Does that actually align? Does the customer actually want that? Do we not get any feedback? Maybe it doesn't necessitate to continue building right away. Maybe we want to wait for one cycle and do something different and then come back to the subject. So yeah, we have really used that as an opportunity to gather feedback and understand what the needs are and what we get asked for and how do we see the product is being used as well, and then building on top of that. But of course, like if we initiate a new product team, then our product organization writes kind of vision documents and whatnot around to like where do they want to take this. Like we might have a theme around CSAT surveys. It might be like surveying capability. It might be we want to have the best CSAT dashboard and so on. Like it's expected for them to understand where they do actually want to take that product line and plan ahead. And they can own that because they talk to the customers about that and they understand what the needs are. And then we kind of have to figure out how does what the customers want bring us value, money, for example, and how that then kind of fits into our roadmap as well, what we will be building and when.
Awkward silence, my favorite. I guess we are done here. Thank you.
No, before you go, I do have some questions.
Oh.
Thank you, Mart and Joonathan. I would not let you go away that easy. As a product manager, I would also like to drill you a little bit. I have prepared some questions. Actually, I would like to ask you, Joonathan, a little bit more broader question. Like in product development, at the very early stage, we aim to go fast, right? We want to like create proof of concepts and MVPs. And what I've seen in different companies is the code legacy. Like, how do you balance between building something fast and avoiding creating bad code legacy?
You give people 6 weeks. No, sometimes like still, and we are building currently on top of like a legacy as well. Like before we started ripping something out in Klaus into microservices and all these fancy new architecture, there was already something in place. And now within those 6 weeks iterations, every once in a while we need to come back and kind of plan that into the 6-week cycles as well. Yes, there's the need to keep 80% of that cycle or whatever the way you're developing into bringing in new value and moving the needle, so to speak. But you need to continuously think about like, can you do something to actually reduce the legacy and fix your technical debt and whatnot in that cycle as well, and kind of bundle that into the cycle. So if you start working on some component that you have worked on previously, maybe there's something you can already groom or fix there as well.
It reminds me a little bit of like the concept of having backlog, though. Like you kind of know that it's there, but you don't like. I feel like you just don't write it.
For technical debt, we actually do have a backlog. Like we do know what are the things, some big, some small, that need to be fixed. And we keep and then we can be quite honest that we keep that technical debt backlog somewhere that it's visible, but it's not something that you necessarily go and take tasks of, because some of the things on the technical debt list might be as big as like fixed notifications, and it's not something that you can just give a developer and oh yeah, maybe you can do this in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, I'm really interested in knowing what's the product there. So I will keep an eye on you, Klaus. And Mart, I would really, maybe you both. So you were talking about this framework, shaping up. I actually haven't heard of it yet, because there's so many terms in product management. It's like sometimes I feel like, okay, but honestly, they are all hybrids. If you see a company, they're usually not using any very straightforward framework. They adopt everything, and it's like a hybrid, and you go intuitively mostly into what you're doing, because there's no one-size-fits-all solutions mostly. And so I was wondering, so what happened with sprints that you started hating them, or like what went wrong? So you decided, nope, let's create our own, let's start using something else. What was the big aha moment for you?
Well, this didn't happen in Klaus, because ShapeUps was already there when I joined a few years back. But when I was sprinting a while back in the other company, then I guess the most I hated about this was that the ceremonies. So if you look at the 2-week cycle of that is the Scrum sprint, then I think there's like 6 to 7 different meetings. You have the backlog refinement, sprint planning, sprint review, all the stand-ups, retro. That's actually useful, that we also use. But still you have that so many ways, and engineers are then like on a daily basis attending meetings instead of building. So there's nothing like that in ShapeUps. It comes with the risk that there might be some unexpected things because we are not refining the tasks, but I guess it's acceptable and better this way.
Okay, so ShapeUp is also not perfect.
Of course not.
Okay.
Nothing is perfect.
That's good to hear. Maybe we can take one question from the audience if you have come up with something. Maybe you would like to ask something from the audience.
Who is considering dropping Scrum now?
No one.
Who
Maybe no
had
one is
heard
doing
about
Scrum.
ShapeUps before? Like we know one team was using actually ShapeUps, but
There are some people.
yeah. Are you using that? Doing ShapeUps? No? You should.
But and just one last question then from me. If you would, if someone is considering actually the switching to ShapeUps, what would be like, I don't know, top 3 recommendations for you to switch?
Come talk to us.
Oh, really? You would like to share your knowledge?
Yeah, happy to actually, because it is. Like there's the book, Basecamp, like.
It's free. The book is free.
Book is free. You can read it. It kind of might leave an impression that it's very fixed and you should do things only as in the books. But talk to people who have tried to implement it themselves in their companies and so on, and come talk to us if you're somewhere nearby, and we're happy to have those discussions as well.
That's a good strategy, because then it will be easier for you to hire people.
Absolutely, that's what we're planning to do.
Well, I thank you so much for a very interesting talk. I really enjoyed how we had this whole very interactive presentation. So thank you. Let's give it up for Joonathan and Mart.
Thank you.